Good morning, First Christian. How's it going, guys? Good? Good. We're down a few people, I see. I think we got some people out with sickness. We probably also have some people that might be traveling because of the holidays. So keep everybody in your prayer. I know that Mark Freem would appreciate our prayers. So please pray for him. Also, in case you guys haven't heard, Mary Abrahams, who a lot of you know from many years past, passed away this week. And so her services will be upcoming. And so we just ask that you'd keep her family in prayer. She was 99 and a half. And man, what a... I was talking to her family this week. I went to see her, and she didn't look like a 99 and a half year old at all. And they said, right up to the end, the one thing that she would still always say to everybody is you're great and you're wonderful. And she was just uplifting and encouraging to the end. And what a great testimony that is. So keep her family in your prayers if you would. I know that they're celebrating her life and the fact that she has gone to be with Jesus. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 63 today. So if you want to turn there, Isaiah chapter 63. We'll be there in just a minute. Today we're going to talk about community and giving thanks, and we've been going over giving thanks and hopefully taking a little bit of a different approach to it that might hopefully increase your ability to have this superpower. But one of the things that's important to understand is you cannot exercise this superpower alone. And one of the things that's really interesting is that anytime anything gets shown to be good or healthy for you, immediately people want to kind of program it into their life. They want to turn it into a life hack where you can kind of take control of it and use it for a better life or better health. And one of the things that's interesting is that giving thanks appears to be one of those things. And one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later is that research shows that giving thanks is a very positive thing in your life. And so you might be thinking to yourself at this point, well, I can kind of just program that into my life. I can just, do some thankfulness kind of exercises. I can start, if you look online, people will always say, keep a thankfulness journal or do those kinds of things. And one of the things that you'll see is while those are useful, that God is kind of, he's this clever fella, God. And he has made it so that thankfulness is one of those things that you can only get the real benefit of it with community. And so we'll look at that today, that the community is a huge part of giving thanks. And so as we go through Isaiah chapter 63 and afterwards, we're going to look at the community of thanksgiving. We're going to consider the mouse. Consider the mouse. Not Mickey Mouse, different mouse. Consider the mouse. And then finally, we're going to look at giving thanks. And so let's look today at Isaiah chapter 63, verse 7. It says, I will recount the steadfast love of the Lord, the praises of the Lord, according to all that the Lord has granted us, and the great goodness to the house of Israel, that he has granted them according to his compassion, according to the abundance of his steadfast love. Now, here's something that's very interesting about this passage, is that it's not very interesting. This is one of those passages, you can find a million of these passages throughout Scripture. And in fact, one of the things that's great about this passage is that it's so, it's not unique really in any way. And the thing that might lead you to ask yourself is, well, why isn't this unique? Why do we find so many of these passages? There's a few things here that are really important, and one of them is that the writer of this passage is saying, I will recount the steadfast love. There's this idea that I'm going to go back over in my head. I'm going to remember. I'm going to look back at history, and I'm going to bring back to mind. I'm going to recall. I'm going to relive the steadfast love of the Lord. And in Israel's case, this went back generation after generation. This went back into thousands of years into the past. But notice that as the writer is saying, I will recount that there's a communal aspect to this. According to all that the Lord has granted, what, me? No, us. There's something about giving thanks. There's something about remembering the goodness of God and giving thanks for it that requires community. And so what we're going to do as we proceed, we want to look at our first point here, and we're going to look at why that is. What is the community of Thanksgiving all about? What is this? Why is it that there's a communal aspect or nature of it? Why can't I just say to myself, well, I'm going to remember all that God has done for me? Why can't I just make this a private practice? There's just a relational nature. And in order to understand this relational nature, we have to go back to the very first sermon that we preached in this series. If you remember, we talked about that Thanksgiving is the completion or the perfection of relationship. Do you guys remember us talking about that? That really what you have in Thanksgiving is you have the completion or perfection of the love that God initiates in our life. The idea here is that God sees us in our need, and that He provides a blessing for us out of His abundant love. And that blessing for us is none other than the bringing us into His presence, the making of Himself manifest in our lives. That, as an example, we if you remember, we used the idea of the 10 lepers. You guys remember that? Jesus encounters these 10 lepers, and they say, "Master, have mercy on us." And that's where God meets us, is in our place of need. And if you remember, Jesus doesn't just heal them, He gives them a command. And then they follow, in the midst of following that command, that's when their healing happens. And then that only one comes back and says, thank you. Only one comes back and expresses gratitude. And Jesus says to this one, go, your faith has made you well. Why is it that just this one has been told his faith has been made well? And I used to think, well, maybe those other 9, maybe their healing went away. Maybe something like that happened. But I don't know if that's the case. I think that what Jesus was probably referring to there is there's something bigger going on than just their leprosy, and only one gets healed from that bigger issue, because the bigger issue is you need to be reconnected with God, and you don't really get reconnected with God until you express joy and gratitude and thanksgiving over His presence in your life. What has God made us for? What's the purpose of this? It's so that we might love Him and enjoy Him forever. It's not complete until the enjoyment is there. Understand that this presence of God, this drawing into relationship, happens within the context of community. If you recall, God says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you. He says, I'm going to bless you, and you're going to be the coolest cat that ever lived, right? You're going to be the coolest, you're going to be the best, you're going to be awesome. You're going to be amazing. Everybody's going to know Abraham's name. People for thousands of years are going to say, where's Abraham, man? I got to go talk to Abraham. Man, Abraham is the best. Abraham has more followers on social media than anybody ever. He's made more content on YouTube than anybody. I mean, he's better known. He's the man. Is that what God said to him? The interesting thing is, if you think about, God approaches this man, Abraham, but notice that there's something that happens, is that in approaching this man, Abraham, He's promising something, and He's promising that I will make you into a great nation. I'm going to bless all the people of the earth through you. You see, when God approached Abraham, He's not saying, I'm going to pull one man out of history, and me and him are going to be thick as thieves, and we're going to be buddies, and we're going to be pals, and I'm going to rub off on him to the point where everybody sees my glory in him, and then everybody's just going to come to him, and everybody's going to go, wow, you're the greatest thing ever. He says, no, I'm going to make you into a great nation. In Exodus chapter 33, verse 13 through 15, it says, now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you, in order to find favor in your sight. Consider, too, that this nation is your people. God doesn't settle with Abraham, but He brings about this great nation of people who will bear the image of God. And remember, what happens is that, things are not going well. If you remember our time in the book of Exodus through the years, that God encounters His people after they have been taken in, and made captives in the land of Egypt, and He brings them out miraculously, and He brings them out through the wilderness. And you remember that immediately they're praising God and everything's great. You remember how that happened? And they're completely obedient and everything goes, and they lived happily ever after, right? No, that's not what happens at all. What happens is that there's all of a sudden there's problems, there's friction. There's friction between the Israelites and Moses. There's problems because they will not listen to God. They're complaining, they're whining, they're grumbling. We talked about that last week. And one of the things that's great is that we're in our Bible discovery class that's happening during our Sunday school hour that Greg is teaching. He's doing a great job, and I encourage you guys to attend. But he pointed out this passage, and I think it's a great passage for us to look at. Because what's happening here is Moses is actually going to God, and he's defending the people. God's tired of all their lack of obedience. He's tired of their grumbling. He's tired of their complaining. He's tired of all that. And so Moses goes to him, and Moses says, look, don't go. Don't do this. Don't give up on us. Don't give up on your people. It says, therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. And he said, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. You see, what's happened is God has been so frustrated with the people of Israel that he's saying, look, you guys can go into the promised land, that's fine, but I'm not going with you. And Moses is saying, this is a disaster. This is terrible. People might go, okay, great. Well, now we don't have to follow God's laws. We can still go up into the promised land. We can still take the promised land. We can still go in there. And now the benefit is that God won't be constantly passing judgment on us. God won't be constantly interrupting us. God won't be constantly, giving us more rules and more laws and more of all these things. There's not going to be fire burning people up and snakes biting people. I mean, we can get rid of all that stuff, and we can go up to the promised land. We can live like normal human beings. Right? Couldn't they say that? But Moses is smart. And Moses says, God, don't do this. Don't do this. Don't send us there if you're not going to go with us. Why? Because the presence of God is the point. It's the purpose. And without the presence of God, there's no future, there's no blessing, there's no glory, there's no any of that stuff. It's all for naught. Everything's been a waste without the presence of God. You see, it starts, remember that in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were there and they were walking and talking with God in the cool of the day, that God would visit them, He would walk with them, He would talk with them. And then the disaster of the fall was that now they're separated from God. God's presence was the point. And God instantiates that in the building of the tabernacle. The building of the tabernacle where God's glory is going to dwell among the people. Because here's the thing that we have to grasp is that building of the tabernacle wasn't just an add-on. It was the point. And God's presence is going to be among His people. And so the tabernacle becomes an image of God meeting with His people. And the tabernacle becomes an image of the people. In Psalm chapter 22, verse 1 through 3, you might recognize this passage. My God, why have you forsaken me? Does that ring a bell to anybody? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. There's a crying out of losing the presence of God and an acknowledgement that God is present. He's enthroned when His people give Him praise. That was the picture of Israel. They were to go forth with the presence of God. They were to be a nation of priests. They were to draw other nations to God. And then we have Jesus. who is this person that is full of the glory of God. In him all the fullness of God dwells. And you might say, okay, well maybe Abraham wasn't the guy, but Jesus is going to be the guy, right? Jesus can be the guy with all the followers. Jesus can be the guy who's got, more TikTok views than anybody in the world. Jesus can be the guy that is there perpetually forever, and people can go to Jesus, because that's what happens, right? When Jesus is on the earth, people go to him, and they're healed from their afflictions and their infirmities, and people ask Jesus questions, and people go to him, and they hear his preaching on the kingdom. And Jesus can just be that person where the glory of God dwells forever. Because in him the fullness of God is pleased to dwell, right? And yet, that's not what happens. Jesus leaves. And you remember that there was a little bit of consternation among the disciples about this fact. That Jesus is leaving. Remember that they're not like, oh, hey, see ya. Let us know if anytime you want to come back. No, they're a little bit upset about this. Why? Why? Because here's this person where the glory of God is dwelling, that God's Spirit is dwelling. Here's the tabernacle. God is tabernacling among his people in the person of Jesus, and Jesus leaves. But he says, you got to wait. For what? For the Spirit. Why? In Matthew chapter 18, verse 18 through 20, it says, truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you, if 2 or 3 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. Why is it that Thanksgiving is communal? Well, because Thanksgiving is the culmination of the love of God. It's the fulfillment, it's the perfection, it's the completion of God's love. And God's love isn't fulfilled or completed or perfected in any one of us. It's not. Are any of you the fullness, the completion, the perfection? Anyone? I can't see super well. No, that's the issue, isn't it? That God, none of us as human beings here can be the place where the fullness of God dwells, but the fullness of God can be manifest in the group of believers, in the community of Christ's body. That's why he gave some to be apostles and some to be pastors and some, right? That's why there's different parts of the body of Christ. Not everybody is a hand, not everybody is a foot, not everybody is an eye. Not every one of us is, none of us is the be-all, end-all. None of us is the completion or the perfection, but it's spread out among all of it. It's a community thing, and that's why the idea of the relationship of God to his people, the love of God being manifest and poured out on his people, is a community thing, and that's why Thanksgiving has to be a community thing. You can't just go out and do it alone. It's not enough to say, look, I'm going to be on an island, and I'm just going to praise God. I'll do it here in my house. I'll just sit here. And the thing is that I know that is a big thing in our culture right now. There's a lot of people I see online, because I get into these discussions and see these communities and things, and there's a lot of people who say, you know what, there's no church that meets all my standards. There's no church that's good enough for me. This church is wrong about this thing, this church is wrong about that thing, this church doesn't agree with me on this church has this practice I don't like, this church has, right? And they get to the point where no church is one that they're willing to have community with. And so they say, well, that's okay, I don't need that. I'll just be here at home on my keyboard, raging about how no church is good enough, and I'll just give thanks and praise to God. It doesn't work that way. God's blessing is his presence in us, and that presence in us happens individually, but none of us is big enough for all of it, and it is spread out through the community. The completion or perfection of love is found in this community. It's a community with God and a community with the saints, and these things aren't separable. It's kind of like, the idea of music. I appreciate the musicians who sacrifice their time for us here every week. I appreciate what they go through. I appreciate the guys in the sound booth. I appreciate all the obstacles that get overcome every week. Every week there are obstacles. This week, there's part of what happens that the iPad up here controls, and all of a sudden it decided that it was going to be blank. It was going to run, but all the buttons and stuff were just not they weren't going to show up. Every week there's something like that. The sound booth had its issues. There was just a lot of things going on. And the thing is that, in a musician, you could say that the spirit of music dwells, right? You could say that. That's kind of what separates a musician from those of us who aren't a musician, is the spirit of music dwells in them. And I love listening to musicians. There's a guy on YouTube named Rick Beato, and he's a music producer, and he teaches music theory classes, and he's written music theory textbooks, and he'll go through a song, and he'll say, this is why this song is great. This is why this song hooks you. This is why this song gets into you. And when he explains it to me, I go, wow, that's amazing. And then after he explains it to me, I can listen and I can hear more in that song than I heard before. But before he explained it to me, I didn't know any of that stuff. Why? Because there is very little of the spirit of music in me. Very, very, very little. But the thing is that which one of these people on stage does the fullness of the spirit of music dwell? The thing is that they need to be in community, right? It's the same with us, that if we want to experience God's blessing and God's presence and God's indwelling, that we need to be in community with other believers. That God's love is perfected in us as a community. And so therefore, the thankfulness has to be expressed in that as well. Well, secondly, let's look at the mouse. Let's consider the mouse. Now, here's the thing. God has given us His Word, and we go to His Word, and we see all kinds of wonderful revelation, specific revelation in His Word. But God has given us other revelations of who He is, and part of that exists in nature. It exists in the world. It exists in what He's created. And we see that all through Scripture. Let me give you just one example. In Proverbs 6:6, it says, "Go to the ant." Your translation might say, "Consider the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise." What is God doing there? He's using His specific revelation to point to general revelation and say, look, I have revealed myself in my creation. That God, the artist, the maker, the author, has revealed Himself in His creation, in His story. And so you can look at general revelation, you can look at nature, you can study that, and you can say, well, here's some things that I can learn about life in the world. And we want to do some of that today, because this week as I was studying this idea of community and Thanksgiving, I got blown away by a few things that we now know by studying the world, that we now know about giving thanks. It's kind of nuts, it's kind of crazy. God has given us this general revelation. Jesus Himself said, consider the lilies of the field. He said, look around you. Look at the birds of the air. Look at the lilies of the field. Figure some stuff out by that. And so we're going to do that. What does a consideration of the world tell us about the community aspects of Thanksgiving? It tells us a whole lot. Gratitude, we know from doing scientific research, and I mean human beings. I don't mean I was particularly involved in this. Gratitude has huge benefits for our health, both mental and physical. Isn't that strange that God has made us such that expressing gratitude has huge benefits for us, not just mentally, but physically also? Did you know that regularly engaging in Thanksgiving can reduce the inflammation in your body so powerfully that it's equivalent to doing a bunch of exercise? Isn't that good news? I know I'm thankful already. That it can fight anxiety in you as good as medication. Isn't that profound? That what we know from studying is that engaging in gratitude, engaging in regular acts of gratitude can have such a profound impact on both your physical and mental health. It can reduce fear. It can reduce stress. It can do things for your body that you only really see in exercise. Now, in order to understand this, you have to understand something else. And to do that, you have to consider the mouse. Now, here's the thing. Let's say you have a mouse. You're a scientific person. We'll put on our white lab coats for a moment. And you're a scientific type guy. So what do? You study mice, because that's what scientists do. Right? You study this mouse and you put him in a cage, and because you're a scientist, you can't just pet him and do normal human being things. You have to dissect, well, not really dissect, but you have to really figure out what's going on with this mouse. And so as he's sitting around in his cage, you take his blood pressure, you do lab work on his blood, you figure out markers of his general health. And then you think to yourself, what if we put an exercise wheel in his cage and he could just run whenever he wanted to? And so you do that. And if you've ever had a mouse or a gerbil or anything like that, you know that if you put a running wheel in their cage, what are they going to do? They're going to run. And so you do that, and after a while, you recheck all those markers of his health, and they're all better. The mouse has gotten healthier because he has decided that he wants to run on the wheel. And you think, I'm now a good scientist. I've learned something important for the world. Now, here's something that's interesting. So you get another mouse in another cage, you put it right next to the other one, and you attach the first mouse's running wheel to the running wheel in the second mouse's cage, and you make it so that whenever the first mouse gets in the cage and runs, the second mouse is forced into his wheel, and so he has to run. Because if you know what happens to a mouse who's on a running wheel, who's decided not to run, it's like being in a washing machine, right? He spins. He goes up and down. It's now a carnival ride. He doesn't like it as much, right? And so he's going to have to run. And you say, so here's the thing. The first mouse is running whenever he wants to run, and he's experiencing these great health benefits. And the second mouse is running, but only exactly as much as the first mouse. And so his health benefits should be the same as the first mouse. And you know what you find when you study it? He hasn't. He hasn't experienced as much health benefit as the first mouse, even though he's run exactly the same amount. It's not just a little difference either. It's actually a tremendous difference. In fact, his health markers have turned negative. Not only is he not experiencing positive benefits, but the experience or the effect on his health has been negative, where the other mouse has been positive. This is very profound to me. And they know why this is true. The reason that it's true is because of our prefrontal cortex. The thing is that it's interesting is our brain, and a mouse's brain, but to a much lesser extent, but our brains as human beings have the ability to set the context for things. And so if you're being forced to do something that's good for you, but you don't want to do it, you actually don't experience benefits from that. In fact, generally you experience negative results from that. Why? Because your stress level goes up. Your irritation level goes up. It changes your body chemistry. It changes your brain chemistry. It changes all of those things. And you don't experience those things. Here's the thing that's interesting. What they've discovered is, not only is this true of exercise and things like that, but let's say this, you say to yourself, I know what I need to do. I want to experience the health benefits of being thankful. I'll just write out some things that I'm thankful for. If you don't believe it, it does you no good. It does you no good. You cannot fake love or desire or enjoyment or any of those things. You cannot. See, God's a clever God. He says, you know what? People are going to try to game the system. It's not going to work. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 says, and without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. How powerful is that passage? You can't just say, oh, you know what? Religious people tend to live healthier lives. I'll just do the things that they do, and it'll be this. It doesn't work that way. You see, your prefrontal cortex sets the context for things in your life. And just going through the motions isn't enough. You actually have to be convinced. You actually have to have faith. You actually have to have trust. And what do you need to have faith in? That when you follow God, when you listen to Him, when you listen to His commands, when He says, if you have leprosy, go show yourself to the priest. When you have faith in that, when you believe that it's for your good, when you enjoy following God, worshiping God, when you enjoy actually giving thanks to Him, that's what changes your life. That's what gives you health benefits. That's what lowers your anxiety. That's what lowers your inflammation. That's where all the health benefits are found. It's found in your faith, not just in going through the motions. Gratitude practices can't just become another thing you add to your list of healthy things to do. And what's very interesting is the most powerful gratitude practices can't be done on your own. I said that there's a little bit of benefit to you that if you write down things that you're grateful for. And the thing is that what they've seen is that the amount of benefit you get that is directly related to how much that really means to you. If you actually are really grateful to God and you write down a list, there's going to be some benefit in your life. If you're just trying to do that because you want the health benefit, it's not really going to work. But there are much more powerful gratitude practices than just making out a list of things that you're grateful for. And this is what really knocked my socks off this week. To be thanked genuinely is one of the most powerful gratitude practices that you can engage in. Not to thank somebody, but to be thanked genuinely. Now, this is very strange. You know, when I first heard this, I thought, what's God doing with this? God wants us to thank Him, and I would think that the most powerful gratitude practices we could engage in would be just to write out a list of things. God, we're grateful for these, and we really believe it. And there is some benefit to that. It is good to be thankful to God. But one of the things that research shows over and over again is that when you are thanked by somebody for something that you've done, and you're genuinely thanked, that is one of the most powerful gratitude practices that you can engage in. Much more powerful than just making a list. What does that mean? What does that mean? Why would God do something like that? It means that you actually have to be in a community doing things for other people. God's tricky, isn't He? You have to be in a community where people have needs, and you need to go meet those needs so that people can thank you. And when that happens, that perfection of the relationship by them saying thank you to you helps you way more than it helps them. We all know it's better to what? To give than to receive. And science says, yep. Yep. But not only that, here's the thing that's really powerful, I think. It means that when you thank other people and you're genuine in your thanks to them, you're providing a service for them. You're doing something powerfully good for them. They need to hear your thanks. You see, so many times it's easy for us to focus on our own needs, isn't it? I need this help, I need this. And the thing that a lot of times when we get those needs met, it doesn't occur to us that we can do something powerful and profound for somebody else by saying, thank you. Man, that meant a lot to me. And being specific is really helpful here. That meant a lot for me. Because you did this, I was able to change this about my life. It had a really good outcome. Man, you can do so much. You see, here's the thing. This whole gratitude thing, it's not something we can just do on our own. We can't just say, oh, God, here's all the things you've done for me. We need to be in a community where we are serving one another and thanking one another. That is powerful. Now, I'm going to give you a second one, and this one is weird. Okay? This one is really weird. It's so good. You know, another one of the most powerful things you can do, more powerful than making a list, is hear a story about somebody doing something for somebody else and being thanked. Hear a story that really moves you. Hear a story that really means something to you. Isn't that weird? That just hearing a story, in fact, story is so powerful. Here's one of the things that they've found through doing a lot of research, zapping people with, magic rays and science. They're just hitting them with science and learning things. Isn't that how it works, Levi? So what they found is this is crazy. That if I sit here and tell you a story or show you like a movie or something like that, that you can come in, you can watch it, and your heart rate and your breathing will get into a certain pattern from watching that story. And I can bring somebody in a different place, a different day, and I can tell them the same story or have them watch the same movie, and their breathing and heart rate will fall into that same pattern. That story syncs up people's breathing and heart rates. Isn't that weird? They found that our brains are really wired in for story. And what they've discovered is one of the most powerful gratitude things you can do is to hear a story that is profoundly grateful in its nature. I've shared with you guys the story of Team Hoyt. You guys remember Team Hoyt? So there was a kid that was disabled. He was in a wheelchair, very severely disabled. Couldn't push his own wheelchair, couldn't do anything like that. And he heard the story of somebody who got paralyzed and ended up in a wheelchair. And it affected him profoundly. And they were going to do a benefit run for this kid. And he wanted to participate, but he can't even roll his own wheelchair. And so he said to his dad, I really want to do this. Can you push me? And so the dad said, okay. And so that's what they did. He went and pushed him through the race. And after the race, the son said to him, Dad, this is amazing, but when you're pushing me in that race, I don't feel like I'm handicapped. I don't feel handicapped. I just like the feeling the wind and everything. I feel like I'm not in the chair anymore. Now that was powerful for the father, right? Because the father loves his son. And so what this guy does is he starts entering into races. Just all kinds of races, and they start off and they're doing 5Ks, and then they're doing 10Ks, and they're doing marathons. He starts doing Ironman triathlons. He's pulling his son. He's swimming. His son's in an inflatable raft, and he's tied to that inflatable raft, and he's pulling his son. And they have a special bike where his son has a way to sit on this special bike. And so they compete in all these races. Well, people start seeing this, and it becomes kind of one of those things that people start talking about is here's a guy who does this stuff. Now, the dad starts getting older. He still wants to do this. He has a heart attack, but he recovers. He still does the races. He ends up passing away eventually. But what's interesting about that is there's a whole, Team Hoyt. You can go to a website. Look up Team Hoyt. You can go to a website. There's chapters, different places of people who have dedicated themselves to helping out people who are paralyzed or handicapped by taking them in these races. His whole chapter started. And his whole family is involved in running it and everything. It's affected the whole family. They become part of this, right? So here's the thing. As I told that story to you, your heart rates and your breathing synced up with each other. And if that story meant something to you, then what's happened is the inflammation in your body has gone down, and your anxiety level has gone down, and you've actually become more open. There's all kinds of practices that make you more open to people, more trusting of people, less fearful of people, more open to relate. All this stuff has started happening neurochemically in your body right now. And you know what's crazy? Is if you remember this story sometime this week, that'll happen again to you. All those things will change in your body. And eventually what happens is you can remember 2 or 3 things like shorthand for that, or even see a picture. You could see a picture of the two of them running together, and all that will happen to you over again. Notice something different about this verse. Isaiah chapter 63, verse 7. I will recount the steadfast love of the Lord. Do you see? God says, remember. Remember all the things I've done through history. Remember all the people that I've blessed through history. Remember my love shown to everybody through history. Why? Because you're a part of that community. Remember that. Why? Because it has profound positive effects in your life. You see, we're running out of time. Let's go on to give thanks. Israel is called to remember and give thanks for these things. Let's look at Exodus chapter 13, verse 3. It says, "Then Moses said to the people, 'Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten.'" Here's the thing that's really fascinating. God said, remember these things. Remember this stuff. Do this thing. Have this festival. Have this feast. Do these things. Why? Because it's good for you, because it places you in the community of faith, even if it happens thousands of years later. It places you in the community of people who are loved by me and who have a relationship with me. It perfects the love that I have for you. You know, there's holiday coming up where we give thanks. It's not something just to go through the motions of. It's something to remember. Well, how do we believe, belong, and become? Because really, we talk about that all the time. What things do we need to believe? How do we need to belong to one another? What do we need to become? I think this one's pretty clear. We have to believe that we're part of the story, that we're part of the story of God's love. We really have to have faith that that's the case, that God is showing His love for us all throughout the history of Israel, all throughout Jesus and His ministry on earth, from all the things that Jesus did, from the death and the resurrection, all that stuff, God was showing His love. We are part of that story. We must belong to the community of faith. And we belong by not just listening to the stories, but by helping one another out and by giving thanks to each other. And we become, what do we become? We become people who are grateful. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23, it says, "For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus on the night when He was betrayed took bread, and when He had given thanks, He broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, He also took the cup after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until He comes.'"
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian Church, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week, everyone.